Good afternoon, Sakelanders. How are you? We hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday, the 9th of October. It's the afternoon. I've been sick for a couple of days, so I'm a little bit out of sorts. And on top of that, like many people, I'm contemplating the USA's midterm election results. But we predicted that, and we'll get to it in another video. This video is, I think, one of the most important videos that I'll ever make. People often say things like that for the purposes of clickbait, they call it, on YouTube and other platforms, to elicit interest, get more clicks and therefore earn more money. But we're not monetized, and in any case, even if we were, this is not clickbait. Now, some of you may not share my opinion of how important this video is, and that's perfectly fine. But in my opinion, this is one of the most important videos I'll ever make. The reason being that, well, I've studied for about 2 years now how people suffer in adverse circumstances, in times of great tragedy and catastrophe and cataclysm. And I wouldn't say that I've become a guru, but I have learned a lot. And one of the things that I've discovered is the prevalence of disease prior to the 20th century, roughly speaking. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but let's say prior to 1900, how much disease was there in the world, and how bad was that disease in certain circumstances? And therefore, it seems reasonable, from what I've learned, to presume that one of the most devastating features of the time for which we are preparing will be disease. If you're an able-bodied man, if you are a member of Colonel du Toit's men, then this may not be the most important video for you, and perhaps not even in the top 10 for you yourself personally, in an absolutely selfish way, so to speak. It seems reasonable to suggest that preparation for defensibility would come before this. However, if you're a woman, in other words, somebody who's not likely to be exposed to far greater danger on the front lines, if you're a mother particularly with children, then this may well be, for you too, one of the most important videos that I ever make. And I'm going to illustrate this point about how bad disease can be by briefly running through some diseases that you may never have heard of, or disease epidemics. And then we'll get on to why there's a likelihood that it will occur also among us, and then we'll speak about particular threats and how to treat them. The Black Death, caused by the bubonic plague. I should point out to you that, hang on, it will come by itself. The bubonic plague, Black Death, killed at least 75 million people in Europe in 7 years. That was 30 to 60% of the European population. The Spanish flu killed somewhere between 17 and 100 million people. Let's call it 40 or 30. The plague of Justinian, this many hundreds of years ago now, also caused by the bubonic plague, killed 50 to 100 million people. Let's forget about HIV, AIDS. The third plague, what was known as the third plague, it was the third time, in fact not the third time, but that's what it's called, that the bubonic plague devastated Europe, was as late as 1855, and it killed something like 15 million people. The Antonine plague killed 25 to 33% of the Roman population, and that was caused by smallpox or measles. The description given by the writers of that time matches either smallpox or measles. The Mexico smallpox epidemic killed 23 to 37% of the Mexican population. Let's call it 30%. Imagine 30% in 1 year. It was over 2 years. It ran for 14 or 15 months over the years, over 2 years. The list of epidemics that has ravaged Europe, I know we just spoke about Mexico, over long periods of time, is absolutely phenomenal. In a couple of years, 100,000 people in the Greek city of Athens died. 10 million people in the Roman Empire, at a time when the Roman Empire, the entire Roman Empire, had under 100 million people. The history of Christendom, the history of the Western European peoples, with their particular genetic ability to endure certain things, to cope with certain things, is littered with phenomenal stories of outbreaks of disease that have devastated, or that did devastate, Europe. Now, if we can agree only that, if we can agree that there's a God, that He is one, that His only begotten Son came to earth as a man, that God has prophets, has had prophets, and that Siener van Rensburg is one of those prophets. If we can just agree on that, Zuidlanders, then everything else that I'm going to say is easy peasy. We can't disagree. You can't disagree with me, not because I'm always right, but because simple, easy, irrefutable, logical syllogisms demonstrate what I'm going to tell you. Oom Siener van Rensburg said that the tragedy in which we shall be involved will be very, very, very bad. He said that during the rebellion, that is to say the 1916, but anyway, during the World War I, the Mani Maritz rebellion, of which he was a part, or of which he was a member, was so difficult, was so metaphorically dark, that, again, metaphorically, so to speak, riding on his horse, he couldn't see the horse's mane. That is the darkness through which they lived. And you're talking about a man who lost children in the Boer War. So you would think, but he said, in the time that lies ahead, I cannot see my hand in front of my face, so dark is it. Right, so I think we're all on the same page still. We agreed with the basic stuff, and this is an easy premise that flows out of, or not a premise, an easy, I can't think of the word, but we can easily accept that prophecy, if he is a prophet, and if there is a God who has prophets, our God. Therefore, is it not safe to assume that we will not have the luxury of every medicine under the sun, that we will not have the luxury of wonderful sanitation, that we will not have the luxury of the wisdom of our forefathers, wisdom in dealing with adversity, wisdom which, by the way, didn't insulate them. Not far from here is a well, it's in the Northern Cape, it's not close to here, is a graveyard of people who worked on like a civil engineering project during the Great Depression, when South Africa, like many other countries, built roads and bridges and dams and you name it, for the sake of employing people as much as anything else. Now, I've visited the graveyard of the camp of those workers on that particular civil engineering project. And it is heart-rending, heart-tearing to walk between those graves and to read Anna Maria Jacoba Du Plessis, 3 weke en 3 dae oud, dood aan malaria. And so it goes on. Improbable as it sounds, there was a malaria epidemic in the region between the Karoo and the Kalahari deserts, where they meet. From that graveyard, you can, if you could levitate yourself. The graveyard is on a little kopje, not a kopje, but like an elevated place. And there's a river that flows next to it. If you could shift yourself in midair, about 200 meters, you would look straight onto the first of the red sands of the Kalahari. It's a little bit obscured where that graveyard is. There was malaria where the Karoo and the Kalahari meet. And those little girls and boys and mothers and fathers were decimated by malaria at tragic ages. That's one example, one illustration. It just doesn't stand to reason that disease will not be one of the greatest threats to our people in a time when we don't have ready access to abundant modern medicine. So there are three modifiers there, 3 qualifiers, 3 riders. Ready access, so it's there whenever you want it, whenever you need it. Abundant amounts of, so as much as everybody needs. Modern medicine. All 3 of those things will be absent. What we will be relying on is Jik and bleach and Jay's fluid and staal drippels, Lennon's medicines, boereraad, herbs. We will also be in conditions of abysmal hygiene. Not all of us, not all of the time, but more of us than you might think. Recently in Vanderkloof we've had very serious electricity problems. You might have heard the story of the baboon that climbed onto the transformer, shorted out the transformer. We were without a transformer for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I think we got electricity on the afternoon of Saturday. In those 5 days, we only had access to the residual or the remnant water in our reservoir, our concrete reservoir on top of the hill here. And it had to be eked out over those 5 days. So we were getting water for 2 hours a day. On 1 or 2 of the days, we didn't even get the 1 hour. There you rapidly discover that anybody who thinks that because they've bought a house in Van der Kloof, Oranje, Douglas, or Uppington, that they are going to have, because they put solar, this, that, the next thing, that it's going to be okay, is wrong. Yes, there's a plan to be made, and some people with good money can put in endless JoJo tanks and endless solar. But the moment that there's a limitation, I have a JoJo tank and I have a nice solar system. I felt it. I felt it. I was ringing up Sharna Maria. She's a lady who's very much involved with the Van der Kloof Belastingbetalers-Vereniging. Saying, please, I'm sorry, I know everybody's got a pain in the neck. I know you're trying your best, you're putting information on the groups. But allow me to abuse our friendship. Please, when do you think? Will there be? What time? I'm just trying to plan. I've got an interview overseas. I would want to wash my hair. So we are all going to suffer less electricity than that to which we are accustomed, apart from a very, very, very small minority. There are very few people who have a system that is 5 times the size of mine, the solar system, which can then accommodate, let's say, 10 occupants of a house with no blips, with no having to rein in their habits. There are very few people who have large enough JoJo tanks and large enough and enough of them to have, with pressure pumps, by the way, and a proper rain collection thing, to not have to compromise their sanitation when the local transformer eventually gives up or is shorted out by a baboon. Because we won't be able to ring up Transformers International in Kimberley and get a new transformer in the crisis that we anticipate. It just won't happen. And if you've got 20,000 litres of water and you are, say, 10 people, and the rain in the Northern Cape ends in May, if we're lucky, and it doesn't fall again, and if it does fall again, it's only slight until November. We've just been blessed with 70 millimeters. 20,000 litres of water is not enough for 10 people to maintain modern standards of hygiene for 7 months. So even those people will have their sanitation and hygiene compromised. Please forgive me for hectoring you, for speaking in an overbearing manner. You know, that's hectoring. But this is a very serious matter. And we are going to see with our eyes little babies die because of this matter. We're going to see it happen in houses that have got solar and water, but not enough solar and not enough water to live as we live now. We are going to see it happen even in houses, never mind camps, where people, I've got extra strong bleach among my preparations. I've got 5 litres of it, extra strong. Stuff is potent. 5 litres, how long is it going to last? A year? Maybe? Then what? And what about the things that I don't have? Because very few people have everything. And we haven't even yet spoken about white tents, refugees, people from overseas, people from Johannesburg who are going to come down and camp on the banks of the Orange River. And they're going to poo in appropriate places. But then there's going to be a strong rain and that poo is going to be washed into the river. It's guaranteed. It's guaranteed. There's no ways it can't. There's just no ways that you can have 100,000 people living off the river in a time of civil war. And none of that waste is going to find its way into the river. The real life doesn't work like that, man. And therefore, and this is why I'm hectoring, we are going to see little girls suffer and die of diseases that are unknown to us, but which have been ubiquitous, that's ever present, throughout the history of mankind. And which have destroyed, which have killed not 1% or 10%. I've got a list here that we're going to get to. You've already heard what I've described to you. The Black Death, the bubonic plague, 30 to 60% of the European population. I can tell you now, I've done research on this a lot. I have used a lot of Suidlanders' time to research the bubonic plague for particular reasons. We are going to have bubonic plague. Not maybe, not could be, not possibly, not perhaps. We are going to have bubonic plague. It's guaranteed. The way bubonic plague works is such that under our circumstances, if we don't have it, and you come to me and say, you made us all hysterical over the bubonic plague, but the war's over and we never had it, and I spent my last cent buying bubonic plague medicine. I'm going to say to you, I don't care. I have no conscience, no shame, no guilt, no regret over telling you that it's guaranteed. Because the reason we didn't have it is miraculous. It is God alone who spared us from the bubonic plague, because every single factor required for the plague, including one specific factor above all others, will be present. And what is to stop rats coming into our... Nothing, nil. That's one example. The list goes on. All right, let's run through this. I have composed a list, or compiled a list of 10 or 11 diseases for us to think about. And I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that if we don't prepare for this thing, thousands of our people are going to be decimated. Hear me. Malaria. I told you, at that graveyard downriver, malaria was one of the chief killers of those people working their fingers to the bone in those rocks to build that thing there. Malaria can be very bad. I worked on Zanzibar Island for a year when I was 22. And to illustrate, I had malaria. I was there with 2 other guys. I went up, fell ill, came home, recuperated, then went up with 2 buddies. Before those 2 buddies came on the second trip, I had 2 friends, British guys, who worked at other resorts to mine, but for the same company. And they were roughly my age, and I got on quite well. There were 3 guys, but I got on well with 2 of them. And one of them was a British paratroop regiment or whatever. And a hell of a nice guy, actually. And he and I parted company. He flew home for leave, and then I fell ill. And anyway, within 2 days of me seeing him, he was dead from cerebral malaria. I go home, recuperate, by the grace of God. It was hepatitis A. I get well quickly. Back to Zanzibar Island with my 2 friends. They fell ill with malaria but didn't die of it. And I fell ill about a week after them on the trip up. So of the 1, 2, 3, 4 friends that I had on that island, and myself, that almost group, all 5 of 5 got malaria and 1 died. Malaria is a very, very serious disease, as you will see if you ever visit that quinine sulfate and doxycycline. If we don't have quinine or quinine sulfate and doxycycline, we will see people die of malaria. It is not necessarily guaranteed, because the region in which we, upon which our national emergency plan is centered, is a very dry, arid region. Therefore, although there is a great presence of mosquitoes, the female Anopheles mosquito that causes malaria is not prolific. So who knows whether we are going to experience what those poor people experienced in that same area 90 years ago. I don't know. I haven't heard of any malaria in this vicinity since I've been here for 5 years now. But I beg your pardon for sniveling. But if malaria comes and we're not prepared for it, it'll thrash us. Anthrax. Anthrax is a disease that's almost unknown to mankind now. It comes from a bacteria from ill animals. Now, if we don't have ready access, as I said before, to abundant modern medicine, particularly, never mind for ourselves, for our animals, does it not stand to reason that they will get anthrax and pass it on to us? I haven't been able to find an ideal treatment for anthrax, so I'm not going to recommend it. And you guys can look this stuff up. I'm really just trying to drum this message home with lots of details and facts and figures to make my argument more persuasive. But that is not to say that I have every answer written down on this piece of paper to which I'm referring. I'm not a doctor or an epidemiologist, more to the point. Cholera. Why won't we get cholera from cholera bacteria, which comes from human waste in water? So human waste in a river, whose water is then drunk. Why won't we? What is the reason why we won't have cholera? There is no reason. Did you know that cholera kills, untreated, 25 to 50% of the people who get it? Imagine 25%. Imagine you've got 10 people in your house, 12 people for the sake of a round number, and one illness passes through, through the water in one given week, and boom, 1 week later there are 9 people. You've lost your granddaughter, your sister, and your husband. Tuberculosis is caused by a bacteria that lives in, or is transmitted in oral and nasal fluid. So it's transmitted by kissing, obviously, coughing, sneezing, even talking, apparently. Untreated. the fatality rate of tuberculosis is 66%. Up to, not always 66%. Apparently, it has a lot to do with genetics. I don't know. I'm no boffin. But in certain instances, in certain cases, in certain epidemics, tuberculosis epidemics, the fatality rate has been up to 66%. Now, can you imagine? Why would it be lower if our standards of protection are lower? You know, if we don't have running water, if we are adjusting to a completely different life, and we are, we have less infrastructure and material resources than a squatter camp in India, because we will do. Remember, squatter camps in India have been figuring out ways to survive, you know, in Calcutta and Delhi for hundreds of years. We're going to go from living in wherever, Parkhurst, Parkmore, Parktown North, Victory Park, Craighall Park, to being refugees on the banks of the Orange River in one fell swoop. In that fell swoop, we won't have any opportunity to figure out the best ways of doing things. We're just going to be, you know. So there's nothing to suggest that we are not going to be the most vulnerable population when exposed to tuberculosis, more vulnerable than villages in Africa with poor standards of hygiene, but standards of hygiene that they have figured out over 100 years and which work to some degree for them. Also remember that we have lower resistance because you and I were vaccinated as kids, because we have eradicated so many diseases, or practically eradicated so many diseases in the 20th century in Caucasian-dominated spheres of the world, and also the rest of the world, also Africa, also India, but primarily where our people have been predominant. Primarily Europe, primarily the United States of America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Canada. Our bodies don't know these things. Measles. Apparently, I didn't know this. You know, I've always wondered about measles because it seems like quite a, not a terribly sinister illness. You don't hear of people dying of measles. And I thought that the obsession with measles was a feminine thing. That measles and chickenpox were taken so seriously because of the scarring and what that means to women. It's very important to women. From very young ages, I mean, you can't even understand it as a man. We don't understand it. How it is that women at the age of 5 somehow seem to see the you know, they want maybe a pair of earrings. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't resonate for us. Good for you, there's nothing wrong with it. But feminine vanity is such an inherent and intrinsic thing that after like wondering about it for a long time, why do we take it so seriously? Why is there so much panic for the vaccination? Maybe it's a chick thing, you know? Prevent scarring, this kind of stuff. It turns out that measles is believed to have killed millions of Europeans over the past few thousand years. Who knew? Vitamin A, it's the only treatment for it apparently. Polio. Polio can only be treated by the inactivated polio vaccine. And we're not going to have that. Who do you know who's coming to the Suidlanders National Emergency Plan with, I don't know, 2 million doses, you know, to last a few years, succeeding generations and all of that, of inactivated polio vaccine? I don't know, nobody told me about that guy. I'm working on the assumption we're not going to have it. That means all of the children born during that time are going to be vulnerable to polio. And if you say, yeah, but Oom Siener, and then if you think about World War III and in the book of Revelation and blah, 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 it's going to only last a maximum of 3 years. You know how many little children could die in 3 years? Now, you might say, well, thanks, Simon. What's the point of making a video in which there's no hope? Even the warning doesn't change anything for us. The hope regarding polio is in knowing that the polio virus cycle is what they call fecal oral, so from poo to mouth. So if nothing else, we will have to take drastic measures to endeavor, at least endeavor, to maintain a level of hygiene and sanitation that might otherwise be unexpected of people in our circumstances. But polio, there will be polio. We will see polio in our lifetimes, you and I. Leprosy. I didn't know this. Leprosy. Many people have leprosy, but the symptoms are never displayed. Up to 95% of the people who ever get leprosy never display symptoms, but they can pass it on. And it can only be treated by, actually there are numerous things that can treat it, but the three that must always be present in any combination, whether you supplement with whatever else, you must have these, are rifampin, dapsone, and clofazimine. And it's spread through bacteria by human contact. From what I understand, even skin contact. It doesn't have to be very intimate contact, like AIDS or just, We are going to see leprosy. See leprosy, we shall see leprosy, you and I. That is guaranteed. What's to stop it? Why won't we? The rest of all of time, the rest of all of the history of the European peoples of the world, prior to modern medicine, saw leprosy. I have been to the old leper colony, the leper colony on the Transkei coast. I can't say I saw anything special there, but there was a leper colony. You got leprosy, tough luck, go spend the rest of your life with the rest of the lepers. That existed the day before yesterday, so to speak. I don't know the year that the leper colonies in South Africa were closed down, or the years. But in terms of history, the day before yesterday, not 3 days ago. Typhoid fever can only be treated by ciprofloxacin. And typhoid fever comes from water and food contaminated by feces. And it has a 10 to 20% fatality rate. Boom, we've got typhoid fever, we don't have ciprofloxacin. Cheers to 10% of the people in a given area. Boom, done. Move on. Typhus. Typhus comes from fleas, lice, and ticks. I beg your pardon. Sorry, everybody. Comes from fleas, lice, and ticks. Typhus can only be treated by doxycycline, and I know that doxycycline is not an uncommon antibiotic among Saatlanders who have medical preparations. I know that it's not uncommon, so I'm not going to dramatize it. I think there may be a certain amount of doxycycline available to us, because it seems to be everybody, or many people, have preparations of doxycycline. But if you don't treat typhus with doxycycline, the fatality rate is up to 60%. Imagine infected rats come in and they're scurrying between the tents and the makeshift shelters and the JoJo huts, the Zozo huts, I mean. And they spread fleas, lice and ticks that have typhus. And the next thing you know, 60% of us are wiped out. And as I've said earlier, and you must please forgive me for giving everybody such a hard time. But don't say to me, yeah, but it's not, I mean, 60% is what happened to the Incas because there was a, no. We are going to have 60%. It's the others who get 55, 50, 40 down to 10%. Why? Because we will have no natural immunity. We will have I will have gained nothing from my mother in the womb or from her breast milk to prepare me for typhus, because my mother and her mother were never exposed to it. And I will have gained nothing from my father in my DNA through his seed, because he and his dad were not exposed to it. So that thing was lost. It's the Zulus and the Bushmen and the Griqua and the Topnar and the Strandlopers and the Pygmies and the Aborigines, the Maoris. They, in Calcutta, they get to kind of choose, do they want to have 10% or 20% or 30% fatality? We get 60. That's us. We're not the exception anymore. It's no longer, oh, those blacks, you know, oh, you can't believe TB. I don't know why they don't do something about it. And you know, it comes from saliva. It comes from saliva. They share, you know, they share their cups. They give it to one another. Just, it's devastating. No, that's how my mother used to talk. Not how she used to talk. I once heard her speak like that about TB. We are not that exception anymore. We're not the guys who get off scot-free every time. We're now the guys who take the biggest pounding. So please, I implore you, we have got to get over this thing of when people say, yeah, between 15 and 20%, we think, yeah, more like 12.5, knowing myself. I've got no intention of suffering like that. No, we're the people. We're the people who have the worst shoes, not the best. Because, name me one shoemaker that you know of our people. I'm not saying we can't make a plan. I'm not saying that the Caucasian peoples are incapable. I'm saying, realistically, in the early phases, which probably runs to years, of the great suffering that lies ahead of us, if Oom Siener van Rensburg is to be believed, we are going to be smacked harder than the others. So that 60% fatality for typhus, that's us, that's you and me. Please forgive me. But this stuff is smallpox and monkeypox. Brincidofovir or Brincidofovir. In the 1800s, in every year of the 1800s, for 100 years, the average mortality rate from smallpox, and monkeypox is apparently very closely related to it, but the fatality rate of smallpox alone was 400,000 deaths a year for 100 years. 40 million people in 1 century died of it. Bubonic plague must be treated with doxycycline. Bubonic plague comes from a what is the right word? A bacteria, a little chocho, that lives in fleas that are associated particularly, but not only, with the oriental grey rat. The bubonic plague, how it works is this: the buboes, bubonic, the name bubonic refers to the buboes, which are the bulbs that you get when you get this illness. Bulbs all over your body, head to toe. And how it works is the fleas live on rats. The Yersinia pestis is in the fleas. When there is exceptional cloud cover and the temperature of a given region drops below 25 degrees Celsius for an extended period of time. How am I going to get this right? The chocho in the flea proliferates. It doesn't proliferate in heat. And as countries go through seasons, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, even in Europe, those periods, it may be in Sweden or Norway, I don't know, it's only 5 days a year, I don't know, I'm not an epidemiologist. But when it's above 25 degrees Celsius, even if it's for a limited period, it puts a halt to the proliferation of these chochos. But when, for a protracted period of time, the temperature is beneath 25 degrees Celsius, these chochos proliferate. And they get into the fleas, and the fleas choke on them. They block the fleas, struggling to think of the word, but the tract, the eating tract, digestive tract, thank you, above the stomach. Who knows why, but they do. So the fleas get hungry, and they come to believe that the problem is, this sounds daft, but it's true, that the problem is the rats, that they're eating the rats. Obviously their brain is minuscule. You know what I mean? You know, these folks are not going for a Nobel Prize in chemistry or physics or whatever. So they seek alternative sources of food, and that's when they go for human beings. Only in cold years, years in which for long periods of time, not just 3 or 6 months, the temperature is consistently below 25 degrees Celsius. Now I can hear you already telling you, I know where Uppington is, guys. I know that it's hot there. I hate the heat. I'm more conscious of the heat in Uppington than you are of many things in your own house, because I can't tolerate heat so badly. It's like, you know, in marketing they call it TOMA, top of mind awareness. The thing that strikes you more than strikes me, or strikes us both more than... I have top of mind awareness of heat. You don't need to tell me that it's warm in Uppington. But if, as Mr. Miller is explaining so beautifully in his talks every day about the unfulfilled prophecies in the Bible, those that are apparently being fulfilled now, this is World War III. And if they do use nuclear weapons, and if, as many of you believe, this period of time, or somewhere in the sequence of this period of time, an asteroid is going to hit the Earth, and it's going to throw up 100 billion tons of dust. And if furthermore, so we talk about nuclear winter, you know that, then the asteroid, and what was the third thing that I was going to say that would reduce the temperature? Oh dear me, it's clean eluded me. Oh dear. If those things occur, nevertheless. I remember now. Thank you. Volcanoes. If this time is accompanied by volcanoes, then the temperature of the entire Earth is going to drop dramatically. And Uppington is not going to be 44 degrees Celsius on a cool day anymore. It simply doesn't stand to reason. Uppington will be just as, not differently, just as prone to coldness as areas of similar cloud cover. The soil is not what makes the difference. If you have the same weather patterns, even if they're artificially induced, as far as cloud cover is concerned, in Uppington as in Iceland, then it's going to be as cold in Uppington as in Iceland. This might sound so dramatic to you guys, but honestly, I really hope that some of you just go and do some research on this, and you will discover that there is no good reason why we shan't be devastated by disease in the years that lie ahead. No good reason except prayer. The grace of God alone. And I put it to you that we are not so holy, our generation, that we are entitled not to get the spanking on the bottom, if I may put it that way, that would, in circumstances of nature, all of the things that I've described, be coming to us. I put it to you that we're not the holy ones, that our forefathers were far holier people than we are. And yet our Lord saw fit to punish them with many dread diseases. I don't mean to get into theology, but I think many people can agree that typically, in biblical terms, illness is associated with sin. I think we all know that. So yeah, guys, this has been one hell of a long video. I ask your forgiveness for my hectoring style, for giving everybody a hard time, but I am very worked up about this. I have spent a lot of time researching it. A lot. And what I've shared with you today is it's not the product of 1/30th of that time. There's a lot more to tell, but it's background stuff. It's not relevant to these videos. And the product of my research, the ultimate, the moral of the story, the long and the short of it, is that disease, in the absence of ready access to abundant modern medicine, is ubiquitous. It is universal. It is always there, and many, many, many people die from it every year, or did die from it every year. That's it, guys. Thank you for your patience in listening to this long video. We hope that the Lord blesses and keeps you for the difficult times that lie ahead of us. And please like, share, and subscribe. Cheerio. Bye-bye.